Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Dr. Allison Brager. She is a neuroscientist and science educator by day and an athlete and coach by night. She's also a former CrossFit athlete as well too. She holds a bachelor's of science in psychology and from Brown University and a doctorate in physiology from Kent State University. Her research focuses on physiology and the genetics of sleep and behavior. I am super excited to have you. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I love the name of your podcast.
Yeah, so the background of it's not like the mind muscle connection, it's muscles, but then also mind and brain and everything like that too. And I also forgot to mention you're also an author as well too. How long ago did you write that book?
I actually wrote it over 10 years ago. It's hard to believe it had its 10th anniversary on Valentine's Day. But yeah, that's Meathead, Unraveling the Athletic Brain. You can find it on Amazon. It's pretty much a popular science book on the neuroscience of exercise, why exercise is so important for the brain in the short term, long term, and also goes into the evolution of an athlete, how people go from learning basic skills, fundamental moves, and then essentially grow up to play professional sports and don't even have to think about the fundamentals at that point. They just act on their instincts.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a super interesting book and probably nothing really like it out there on the market, I feel like.
No, I probably should have done a better job marketing it. When I wrote it, I was a postdoc fellow doing my fellowship after my PhD at the time, but I really felt the message was important to get out. So I'm happy it's out there. And we actually created a research society around it. It's called the Society for Sports Neuroscience. So it's a professional research organization that gives the opportunity for exercise physiologists and neuroscientists to collaborate together, because those are two very different communities culturally. My buddy Andy Galpin will tell you about that as well. He and I are like the black sheep of both neuroscience and exercise physiology, but that's what makes Andy and I us. But yeah, so I'm happy I wrote it. We created a professional community out of it. And as if I can help as many athletes, coaches, and scientists along the way, that's all that matters to me.
Do you think that would be a good book for like kind of Gen Pop as well too, or?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I wrote it for Gen Pop. So at the time I was teaching a basics of neuroscience class at Morehouse College, where I did my fellowship at Morehouse School of Medicine. So it's as if I took the neuroscience textbook that I taught at Morehouse College and applied it to the principles and practices of athletics and coaching. So it's just very basic level, anecdotal, but also empirical evidence and very like rudimentary explanations for how the brain works and why exercise is so important for the brain.
I definitely feel like when at least the background I come from in terms of like body composition, stuff like that, I feel like the brain is like a very understudied and like just something that people just don't really talk about. But I feel like it's super important for obviously athletics, but just body comp change in general too, I feel like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We saw that, I would probably say 10 years ago with, I don't know why I remember this book more so than anything I've read, is The Green Brain. And this idea that it's more than just carbs and glucose that are fueling the brain, the importance of omegas and different fats and how they sustain long enduring cognitive function of the brain. I teach a nutritional neuroscience course now at my wife's university. I'm an adjunct faculty there, and I'm always just amazed. I think that's the one field, nutritional neuroscience, that has evolved more rapidly than any other field of neuroscience or exercise physiology.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I think now's a good time to just chat about where you got or how you got to where you are today. I think it'd be super interesting to just get your background. I know that, like I said, you're a CrossFit athlete, or you were a CrossFit athlete at one point. I just feel like there's a lot of cool things that you do, and it will be really interesting for the audience to hear. Yeah, brief how you got to where you're at today.
Really, this sounds silly, but growing up, I had one of my coaches always used to tell me to plan your career around your lifestyle and not your lifestyle around your career. And I think that's what I've done. Is as a kid, I always wanted to be a professional athlete or an astronaut, like either or. And so I went after that dream of, as a two-sport athlete year round. I did get good grades. That is one thing I focused on, like for myself, for no one else. My parents didn't go to college, grew up in a pretty normal middle class family in the Midwest. So they supported my brother and I, but they didn't necessarily push my brother and I in a bad way, meaning they weren't helicopter parents like some of my teammates in college who had helicopter parents. I'm very grateful I didn't have that. And so after college, I still continued to do well in pole vault. So I thought maybe I could have a chance to make the Olympic team. So that's actually why I went to grad school where I did. It just so happened one of the world-class experts in sleep and circadian rhythms was there. I knew that's what I wanted to focus on because I worked in a sleep lab throughout my time in college. Realized pretty quickly I couldn't burn two candles, like the candle at both ends. Something had to give. So I just continued pursuing my PhD, but still coached track and field in the interim and found CrossFit. CrossFit always filled that competitive void that I lost through track and field. Being a gymnast for essentially 20 years, I did really well. And so I've continued along that spectrum throughout my life. It's just trying to be a scholar athlete as much as I can, like living. My high school mascot was conveniently the Spartan. And I just feel like I've lived the lifestyle of a Spartan my whole life, like from focusing on family, focusing on scholarship, focusing on sports. Those are the three things that matter to me the most. And so I try to incorporate those values into every aspect of my life to include here at work, right? I work in the military, I'm in the military. And what's the military about? It's about scholarship, it's about sports, it's about community. And yeah, that's really, I think, the secret to happiness in life is like, sure, money's important to an extent, but it's like the passion and it's the impact you can have on others. That's really, I think, going to drive your purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's not all about money. It is important, but again, if you're doing something you enjoy, you're gonna put everything into it, and it's gonna show. So as far as CrossFit goes, just curious to hear a little bit more about that. When did you compete? What is that? You still train that way? What does that look like?
Yeah, I have on the shirt from the Masters
Nice.
World Championships last year. Yeah, I would refer to myself as a retired games athlete at this point. When I started CrossFit, I got serious right away with it, mostly because I went to a gym that happened to have current games athletes. So like I didn't get an introduction to fit. I just dove right in. There's no such thing as like on-ramp classes or foundational classes back then. But yeah, I went to regionals like in my very second week of CrossFit ever was the CrossFit Open, made it to regionals. I competed in regionals twice as an individual in the Southeast. And then I spent 2 years competing on a team. So we went to the games in 2013 and back to the games in 2015. I ended up being an alternate at the games, which emotionally was a very different world for me. But I think in hindsight, it was a great experience to have to develop just incredible resiliency, right? Because that honestly was the first time in my life where I ever got demoted to the bench and to JV, if you will. I realized up until that point, I had always been varsity, right? Was a 4-year varsity athlete in college, in high school for 2 sports. I was always on the A team. And so to be on the A team and to train with the A team and then to get there and realize that I got demoted to the B team at the games. It was hard, but I think I learned more from that experience than I did the year that I did actually compete at the games on the team. And then after that, I did spend some time competing professionally in CrossFit through the Army. So the Army has CrossFit as part of their world-class athlete program, which essentially is a program where you spend time in the Army being a professional athlete. By that point, as a master's athlete, I almost made it back to semifinals as a master's. I didn't, but I have competed in the Masters World Championships with the International Functional Fitness Federation. So this is a federation trying to get CrossFit into the CrossFit Games, CrossFit into the Olympic Games. There's like a certain standardized program you have to have. You have to show worldwide representation across all different age groups. So I still compete, I essentially do GPP, so general population programming now. My body at 40, almost 41, can't sustain the wear and tear of the CrossFit program now because it is having evolved in the sport over time. I can tell you like 2016 is where the game changed for CrossFit, right? Before then, you just had to be a good athlete in college. Most of us were former D1 athletes who did some form of intense training and 2 hours a day of CrossFit. After 2016, 2017, it became a full-time dedicated sport where you had to train 5 or 6 hours a day in order to get to the CrossFit Games, let alone semifinals or regionals. So I've definitely been with every evolution of the sport, to include even just the early days of the games when we had to swim in the ocean, like the Pacific Ocean, and drag this raft around, this 800-pound raft around the Manhattan Beach Pier. Just there's certain things we did back then that we look back in hindsight and I'm like, man, I can't believe we had to do that or did that.
Yeah, that is crazy. So do you feel like you said it at 41, do you think it is just it's a combination of where the programming's gone and age and like maybe your responsibilities? Is that, would you say it's all those things, or is there anyone in particular that you feel like is, hey, I just am not able to do as much as I once was there?
Oh, I would say it's definitely life, right? I don't have kids, but I honestly I had far more time to train and I had way more control over my own schedule when I was even a fellow. Like, even if I had to be at work to do like late night data collection in the middle of the night, I at least had control of my training schedule my day prior, because I didn't have people reporting under me. But now that I'm a leader and have been a leader for 8 years in the military, like I have to be the first to arrive and the last to leave. Like, I have people who depend on me, and I manage a lot of programs and money and have a lot of different responsibilities. So I only have an hour really to work out, and it has to be intentional. And I make it intentional and intense, but that's the biggest thing is life takes over.
How do you maximize your ability to recover with all the things you have on your plate and still get in an hour to train? Do you have to be a little bit more efficient in your training? And then I'm assuming that's something that obviously bleeds over into, like, you obviously know a lot about circadian rhythm, sleep, everything like that. So I'm curious to hear what your setup is there for that, to maximize that side of things.
Yeah, so I think it's about setting boundaries and being intentional, right? So, like, my schedule, I do travel a ton for work, but even then, it's very predictable. Like, when I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm training, I'm not like screwing around in the gym. I get there, I warm up, I do the workout. Maybe I'll chit chat here and there between sets, but then I leave. I always try to get in, like, I definitely mobilize. That's the one thing I have to do with age, right? Is spend 15 minutes at the end of whatever I'm doing mobilizing. Sometimes I'll get the chance to sit in Norma Tech. Usually, if I do that, I take care of other work stuff that I didn't get to. But the one thing I always do, and this ties into sleep and circadian rhythms, is I always, and I've been like this since I was a kid, is I always make sure I get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Like, I find ways to essentially program my whole day around sleep and making sure I'm going to bed around the time that works for me, but also is consistent, right? So for me, it's like 11:15. I am a night owl. And that's, I try to block off between 11 and 7 sleep, and only for sleep, and whatever I'm doing up to that point stops, because quite honestly, I'm not going to have quality devoted towards that task if it's past my bedtime anyways.
Yeah. So for you, it's just setting those boundaries and staying consistent with that. And you're able to do that with the work that you do currently at this point. You don't have to be up super early, stuff like that.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think I strategically have found myself in positions in the military. I'll be honest with you. I love working for the military. I love serving our country, but I refuse to take a job that does not align with my schedule. And I know that seems selfish, but that's how I set boundaries. I can promise you, when I show up to work and when I'm a leader, I will be the best leader possible and I will commit every effort to it. But I also need to make sure that I'm doing my role and getting enough sleep in order to be the best leader possible. And I won't be a good leader if you force me to come to work every morning at 6 a.m.
Are you basing this off of just, again, just what you know about sleep and what you've learned and studied over the years in terms of, hey, like, that's just something that I'm not willing to sacrifice, and that's going to put you in the best position there? Is that just based on all the research, everything like that you've done over the years and stuff like that?
Nah, it's funny you say that. I think the research has reinforced that, but really, I realize now in hindsight, my parents had really great habits. Like, at the end of the day, there's probably a reason why my parents, like, knock on wood, are in their early 70s and really healthy, is because they have always, even though they've had 9 to 5 factory blue collar jobs their whole life, like they went to bed at 10:30, they woke up at 6:30. Like, they created these regimented schedules in my brother. And I think I realized early on, like, it's those regimented schedules and getting 8 hours of sleep a night that really make everything else during the waking day easy. And that's what our research shows, is like for every hour of lost sleep, you essentially have a 30% reduction in performance. And when you extend your wake far past 16, 17 hours a day, like essentially your work quality is the equivalent of being buzzed and or legally intoxicated. So like, why would you put forth effort and energy into work that you know is not going to be high quality?
And it's interesting too, because I feel like we were told for the longest time, you don't really need sleep. You'll sleep when you're dead type of situation. And you just need to
Yeah.
grind and work. And I feel like now, though, people are really coming to, again, I still feel like not everyone, I think people think they sleep good and they do the things, but they probably don't. But I feel like it is coming around now to where it's like, all right, hey, like it's super freaking important.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm proud of the most with the military, right? Is that was the culture. This generation, there's such a divide between the current senior leaders of the military and this new generation. And we've had to spend a lot of time educating these senior leaders. Hey, believe it or not, this younger generation coming up into the Army, like they got it right. You're the ones who did it wrong, like your whole careers. And so it's been really profound and inspiring to see these senior leaders like accept their vulnerabilities and to try to break these old dying habits of theirs. So it's actually it's been a great time to be an expert in sleep in the military.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question around like what you do in the military. Yeah, I'm sure people would be curious to hear what your work is around there in terms of how much you can share and everything like that.
Yeah, I essentially serve in research and development for the military. So what's really cool is we spend most of our careers hopping around to different commands and supporting the development of research to help them perform better, help to improve safety, or to help develop a new technology that the military can then use to enhance their warfighting capabilities. So that I think that's what's really cool about my job. So at present, I do work with special forces, but I am moving next actually to teach at West Point, so the military academy. Before that, I was in the recruiting command. So how do we use research and new technology to assess and select recruits for certain positions, particularly like when you're talking about drone operators, right? We had this huge marketing campaign around recruiting people who played video games, right? It's like the antithesis of the types of people you'd expect in the military. But with where warfare is going, you want someone who's capable of being comfortable and excelling in a virtual world. I can tell you it's not me and it's not most traditional sport athletes. And not to dismiss, yeah, sure, you want those people in the military, right? Because they are so incredibly physically fit that, as my book will tell you, they also possess a very high level of cognitive fitness. But you also want people who are very comfortable in the cognitive fitness domain already and operating in a virtual space to join our team too.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. What are some like interesting kind of like findings and like studies that you've done? And I'm assuming you are doing like some of the studies, right? So I guess because
I
part of what
am. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess part of what you're doing is like sleep and like extreme environments and like high stress situations, right? That's some of the main stuff. What I'm just curious, like, what are some of the really interesting kind of findings that you've had over the last few years around there? Or anything that you thought was like super interesting, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think speaking very generally without giving away like certain groups we've worked with, I think consistently in all the groups we've worked with, whether it's conventional forces or special forces, if you are preparing for sleep deprivation, you are better off for sleep deprivation. So if you are keeping a consistent schedule, you are getting sufficient sleep leading up to, say, a 24-hour training exercise, or say a flight from the US over to the Middle East, you're going to be better off if you've done the prep work on the front end with sleep, just like you would with fitness. I think the other major finding we've had too, while this nurture is important, like it's important to prepare for the unknown and unknowable in terms of sleep, nature does really win. A lot of sleep and your resiliency to not just sleep, but psychological stress and physiological stress is genetically controlled. And I know that's a story a lot of people don't want to hear, right? Because there's a lot of slippery slopes into morals and ethics. But at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe that people pre-select for certain career paths and certain jobs based on their own genetics and how they perform. myself as an example. Like I knew pretty early on, I was a night owl. My parents are night owls. So it makes sense. Like I did really well in gymnastics, right? Because when do gymnasts train? They train at night we'd have practice at 5:45 and we go from 5:45 to 8:45. I'd come home, I eat, I go to bed. When it comes to doing high intensity work at night, now in the military, like I do very well, right? Because I have that genetic blueprint to be a night owl. What I don't have is I don't have a genetic blueprint to be a morning person. And I know that because like tomorrow, for example, I have to be at work at 7:30. Tomorrow morning is going to suck because my body does not want to be awake before 7 a.m. ever. That's the type of work I've done over the years, but that's what our science shows is a lot of nurture is important. At the end of the day, nature and our genetic blueprint will chart our path for who we are. And you could say the same with body composition too, right? All that research over the years with endomorphs, mesomorphs, and ectomorphs, like we have to acknowledge that your biology and physiology is driving a lot of those body composition and body types.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying there is, again, you could have genetics kind of set up a certain way and you can definitely manipulate them slightly, but at the end of the day, it's someone's not really going to be able to drastically alter that. And again, I would imagine with the military, there's just certain people that, again, from whether it be a sleep thing or a resilience to stress, whatever it is, they're pre-programmed to excel at that versus somebody else who probably isn't there from that perspective.
Yep, it's the same in sports too. One of my favorite books is by this author. It's called The Sports Gene, and it talks about like why high jumpers, what's unique about them, what's unique about a Jamaican sprinter. And when you look at their underlying physiology, there are ethnic and regional differences in genetics. And if you look at where some of the best athletes in the world across generations, so like from the early days of the Olympic Games to now, they all come from these similar regions and their genetic blueprint is very similar. I say the same thing about Olympic athletes. So twice a year, I coach at this camp. All of us, with probably the exception of me, are former Olympic athletes. So most of them competed anywhere between the 2000 and 2008 games. And like when they're introducing themselves to athletes who are up and coming, like it's very clear who are the weightlifters, who are the gymnasts, who are the rowers based on anthropometrics alone. So it's like you pre-select into the sport you were built to do. There's probably no question I became a gymnast because I am a true mesomorph and I'm pretty short. So of course, gymnastics and pole vault was going to be my sport of choice.
A lot of muscle and not a lot of body fat. So a lot like very strong for your body weight on there. Perfect for a CrossFit athlete and gymnastics as well too.
And an astronaut too, because astronauts are very short. So people like they might look tall, but there's a height requirement, a height restriction.
Which I'm glad you brought this up. This was something that we chatted about off air. And I just found out on the podcast you were just on that you obviously selected every 4 years for that, but that is something that you would like to do at some point and are, like you said, you're in the running or for that, correct? To be an astronaut.
Yep.
What does that look like from how do you, again, is there anything special that you need to do? Is it, again, something that like people are like pre-selected for, you think, or what does that kind of look like from there?
I would say just like with everything else, just whatever you're passionate about, you got to just keep along that track and just trust the process and be patient that one day it's your time. I do have mentors who are current or former astronauts, and that's what they've told me is just always try to be the best in your field. Like I'm trying to be the best neuroscientist in a very unique way by also working for the military and working on operationally relevant problems and keep up my physical fitness, continue to be an athlete, learn new sports often and play them often, like the CrossFit motto, right? And just hope that one day it's my time.
Is there anything that you need to do like from a training perspective or anything that you like need to focus on from that to get ready to be able to do that? Or
yeah, some of that I've already done that. And actually that's part of my work responsibilities here without saying too much is I did go through a dive medicine course about 4 years ago. Honestly, it was probably the hardest 3 weeks of my life. I would say it was even harder than competing and actually training for the CrossFit Games, because that's one thing about astronaut training. You think of they're practicing their maneuvers, they're doing training exercises leading up to their eventual mission in space underwater. using scuba. That is a skill set I learned, and it's part of my job here. And then just right, trying to get trained in all different types of, like what I say, like austere medicine or operational medicine as possible. So how can I treat, triage, and care for someone at a point of injury in a place in the world that has very limited access to modern hospitals and facilities and resources? Like, what would I have to use in the environment to stabilize this individual, and for them to keep their eyesight, limb, and body stabilized, knowing that it might be 130 degrees outside or minus 30 degrees outside. And we might be a 3-day trek away from the closest trauma center. So that's very fascinating stuff to me, because you have to be creative, right? You have to be resourceful, you have to be creative, and you have to make decisions quickly and not pontificate on them.
Yeah, no, that's super crazy stuff to think about. So again, it just sounds like you have to figure out how to work with the body in like very extreme conditions there and what may happen. And so learning how to do that and also think clearly, I feel like as well too, to be able to do all that is just insane and something that I could never imagine doing.
And that's where sleep comes in, right? Is because that's the first thing that happens with sleep loss, even just acute sleep loss, is the fogginess, right? And your just reaction time is slower. We know that can be the difference between a life and death decision and whether that person's stabilized or going to pass.
Yeah, and when you put it that way, it's hey, better get your sleep there. What about from like a obviously when you're in space stuff like that? To me, at least from my understanding, I don't know really much about this topic at all, but an atrophy standpoint, right? Is that something that is a concern? Would be a concern? Is there any way to get around that, or is it not a concern?
It definitely is a concern, right? There's protocols in place to preserve and protect skeletal muscle mass, bone loss, but also helps to have people who on the front end have a large muscle mass and bone loss. Like, I thought for sure, if anything, and I still believe like that's going to be my ticket, is like, I have this skill set, I am an expert in my field, but according to one of the technicians at NASA who has done the bone scan for every astronaut or astronaut candidate since 1984, she has never seen bone density on a woman like me and Sally Ride. So apparently I have the bone density of Sally Ride, but makes sense, right? I was a gymnast, and then I was a gymnast convert and found CrossFit, and I still pole vault. So my tendons and my joints, my bones take a lot of beating. And I eat healthy too. And I sleep well.
Yeah. And so it sounds like going in, having more is going to be something that you'd ideally want to do because
For sure. Even skeletal muscle mass, right? I will admit, I am fortunate. I come from great genetics, right? My parents are both mesomorph. I've never had issues maintaining lean muscle mass. Sure, I eat well. I eat clean 75% of the time. I have a regimented training schedule no matter what, even if it's a stressful work week. And I can maintain my lean muscle mass around like 90 to 91%. Like, my percent body fat has always been between 13% and 9%, like consistently my whole life. And I've never had any issues because of it.
Again, like you said, you sleep well, and I think that's obviously super important. And then, like you said, the genetic side of things, some people they get as lean as you get, and it's going to be hard for them to hold on to their muscle. Yeah. But again, having the right kind of set of genetics, again, we don't want to say it's all genetics, but again, it obviously can help you out there, especially from that perspective. So again, it comes back to, like you said, some people just are a little bit better suited to go do something like this based on their genetics.
So I'll admit, like for example, the evolution of CrossFit, you have to admit, like, the type of athletes that sport favors has changed over the years too. I would say in the early years, there's a reason why gymnasts, soccer players, ex-wrestlers, baseball players did really well, right? Because it was a mix of anaerobic performance. Now it's a lot more anaerobic. And if you look at the body comp of the current CrossFit roster, and I actually saw this recently too. Did you know that the average size of a female who competes at the CrossFit Games now is anywhere from 160 to 175 pounds? Oh. Back when I was competing, we were all between, I would say, 125 and 140. So you're talking about like 30 to 35 pound difference. And quite honestly, even at my biggest, like when I was competing professionally in CrossFit for the Army, the biggest I ever was, and I had to really try hard, was like 150 pounds. So I do think that's interesting. And it's the same with men too. It hasn't been as drastic for the men, but on average, like the average male CrossFitter is who competes at the games is like 20 to 25 pounds heavier. And they're all just extremely short, right? I know Pat Vellner and Brett Fikowski are like the anomalies, but it's just fascinating how, as the sport has grown and evolved, we now see what types of anthropometric features in athletes are best suited for the sport. And if your body isn't capable, like I know my body is not capable, it can build muscle quickly, but it can never hold on to that amount of tissue, whether it's fat or muscle. It will try to shed it as quickly as possible. Like you're just not going to succeed.
So would you say that evolution is like more like just people are like more like muscular now and or it requires that amount of like meticulous like eating and recovery and stuff. And then again, it just predetermined that those people are going to be the ones that stick to it and do the best in the sport.
I think it's a combination of both. So I think what I've seen, and again, this is just someone who has been involved with CrossFit since the beginning, I sit on an advisory board for CrossFit now, is if you look at, like you say, that the first generation of CrossFitters, if they were able to make it to the second or third generation of CrossFit, like the one thing they had to change was their nutrition, because how we fueled ourselves was also very different back then. It was the paleo diet, which is actually not suitable for performance nutrition. Like we did everything you should not be doing to be an elite athlete, which is hilarious. So they were able to do that for a little bit, but they weren't able to sustain that body weight. Like even if they got a little bit bigger, they weren't able to sustain that body weight. And what I mean by that is they ended up getting injured, right? Because with that extra mass that all of a sudden they miraculously built, they didn't have that lifetime of buildup in their tendons and their joints to sustain that extra centripetal force or like physical force that was being put on their bodies as they're trying to do high intensity exercise. Whereas I think with this second and third generation, it's a combination of their body types coming in mixed with putting that stress on their joints and tendons, and then also adding the nutrition piece, which is the right kind of nutrition, not the calorie deficient, carb deficient nutrition that we had.
Yeah. So again, evolution around like practices around like the nutrition as well. Like you said, making sure you actually feel better with it, right? Again, get, like you said, carbohydrates and everything like that.
Yeah. I'm so mad at myself. Like I remember the big thing was like drinking coconut water, having coconut cream, like you had bacon with every meal. At the end of the day, we should have just done what we used to do in high school, which is eat a few gummy bears and have a granola bar and down some Gatorade and call it a day. But somehow we thought that was improper nutrition, where now we know that is like the actual performance evidence-based approach to excelling in sport.
Real quick, to go back to becoming an astronaut, in terms of another physical fitness kind of trait, how important do you feel like your cardiovascular system would be? Like, is there any, again, you kind of mentioned like anaerobic, more aerobic style. Is there anything that you feel like would do well, particularly there with that? Is there anything that you would want to focus on a little bit more from that perspective?
I would say it's definitely more of an endurance. That would be the more preferred approach, right? Because if you think about their mission set, it's very enduring. And then something as like a spacewalk, right? It's hours and hours of fine motor control, deliberate movements over time. It's not a high intensity workout. So that is one thing. Like I would say over years, my CrossFit training or my approach to training has changed as well. Like I no longer am doing these 5 to 10 minute Metcon gassers. I'm doing more, I would say zone 2, zone 3 training, where it's over 20 to 30 minutes of sustained performance, which I think actually makes you, as like I know Chris Henshaw says, actually makes you a better metabolically conditioned athlete anyway.
To do more of the kind of longer distance, lower intensity type stuff. And for you, that
because you have that ability to further oxidize the lactic acid, which is the rate limiting factor in terms of whether you can sustain the power and stamina throughout a high intensity workout.
Yeah. That's the kind of boring stuff, but again, it does work. It's like you said, it allows you to be able to push that further, and probably from just like a recovery perspective too. I would imagine it also helps with like overall recovery and everything like that too.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. What I do want to talk to you about sleep here a little bit. One thing I do want to talk about is circadian health and importance of that. On your recent podcast episode with Andy Galpin, I know you talked about you guys were talking about, okay, hey, everyone's obviously heard like this, hey, you need to get 8 hours of sleep, you need to sleep in a cool dark room, some of those types of things. But one thing you mentioned I thought was super interesting, and I'm just very fascinated with circadian health, is the importance of your circadian rhythm when it comes to that. And that's like another kind of next layer of, hey, if you're nailing those things, what's the next thing we can do? So I would just be curious to hear your kind of thoughts on circadian rhythm in general, maybe some things that people need to know and what you think are the most important things from that perspective.
So I think it goes back to everything we talked about before, right? Schedule is king. So you have to keep like a consistent sleep bedtime, a consistent rise time. You have to have regimented, predictable meal times and then training times. Now, ideally, some people are going to train better between mid-morning, early afternoon, because they're capitalizing on that rise in cortisol. Not everyone has that luxury, but then that's where you figure out things like if you're a morning person and you can't train between 10 and 1, then it's probably best you train in the morning versus the evening. Whereas I'm an evening person, so it's better for me to train in the evening, even if I'm exhausted from the workday, than it is to train in the morning.
So again, timing your workouts, like making sure that's aligned with what you do, getting that schedule. What about like light? Like what's the role of light in terms of your circadian health? Is that something that you often focus on as well?
Light is one of the most potent drivers of performance and alertness, right? There's a reason why there's that protocol now. Honestly, that protocol has been around for a very long time, even before Andrew Huberman, which is like sunlight exposure in the morning and then dampening down like your high intensity after sunset. But it's also important to maintain consistent and natural light exposure during the day. Now, that's part of why we look at the architectural design of new buildings. A lot of them have glass windows, and I'm sure they might not be energy efficient, but at least from the perspective of human health and performance, it is, because of exposure to natural lighting versus poor artificial light, the office I'm in, right?
So you could still make like being in an office, as long as it's got windows, you can make that work and count towards your light. Or would we rather you just get outside too if you can? I'm assuming that would be a little bit better. Or
Yeah, that would be preferred. Like either that or there's a lot of different lighting environments now that are like a lot of lighting companies have worked with corporate companies to make the inside feel like they're outside, if that makes sense.
yeah, as far as circadian health goes and circadian rhythm, is there any other like common mistakes people make, or is there like a common thing that you see that people do mess up when it comes to that?
I think in general, whether it's light, whether it's food, whether it's exercise, is like as soon as you alter the timing of that light exposure, that's where you're going to have issues, right? Light, if the light exposure is mistimed, that's going to create the most issues, but you can't dismiss the improper timing of food and exercise as well. And they have similar effects to somebody who actually is traveling across time zone. Like those are the things you need to control when you are traveling across time zones.
And you mentioned this earlier. So again, we have, generally speaking, you want to be awake in the morning, right? You want to be sleeping when it's light, dark out, everything like that. But you did mention that there's also like you're a night owl. So there's a little bit of difference there in terms of some people are night owls, some people are morning people. How would you know which one you are?
Really, it's through trial and error. Like you have to look at it's highly genetically controlled. So you have your parents as the bet. And if not, there is a questionnaire you can take. It takes like 12 minutes to complete. It's called the morning evening questionnaire. It's 19 questions. It's very stable. Most people aren't extremes. 80% of the population is either somewhere in the middle, but either has a tendency to be later evening or a tendency to be earlier morning. But it's really just through trial and error and self-awareness and self-reflection of figuring out who you are.
And there's not going to be anyone that's, like you said, they're not going to be drastically different, right? No one's going to be like, oh, hey, I need to be like, people think they're probably a little bit more extreme than what they would really are. I would say, if anything, if someone does feel like they're a bit more extreme, it probably has more to do with kind of their habits and upbringing and everything like that there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Habits to a point, if they really are an extreme night owl or morning person, like as for example, if you, I'll use myself as an example, and I talked about this on Andy's show, is I'm a night owl and it's really difficult for me to do 4 a.m., 5 a.m. wake times. I can do it, but as soon as I get off it or I add extra stress in my life, I get sick. And as soon as I get off that schedule, my body will immediately go back to a later schedule. So it's your genetics first and foremost, and then it's the habits that sort of keep the schedule going.
And so you can train yourself to be a little bit earlier if you wanted to, but you're always going to, just like we've been talking about throughout, you're always going to have that push to be in a certain spot there.
Exactly. Yep.
And then in terms of like sex differences in terms of sleep, is there anything there that I know people say that, oh, women need more sleep than men? That's a myth going around. Is that, yeah, what is that?
Yeah. So it is a myth, and that goes back to this point of, is it clinically significant, right? So what we know from animal studies, human studies, that on average, women require about 30 to 40 minutes extra sleep than men. Now, it's hard in humans to like decipher, is this socially influenced or is this biologically influenced? But really, is that 30 or 40 minutes clinically significant? So I don't believe in this. There's this whole like whatever, it's like good judgment, bad initiative of, oh, women need to be in bed an hour and a half before men, and because their sleep is less efficient, they need to wake up later, blah blah blah. That's just going to create more psychological stress in people. One of the things we know from our studies is your mindset when you wake up predicts your daytime performance. Even if you got horrible and poor sleep objectively, if you think subjectively you got good sleep, guess what? You will perform better that day than someone who thinks they got poor sleep.
That's
you
where
know that for a fact.
That's where the brain comes into play here, and
Right.
how you can trick yourself with that.
Yep.
So really what it sounds like, hey, if you do get a poor night's sleep, not the end of the world. You can trick yourself into thinking you're going to be fine. But I would imagine that over time, you want to make sure that you're not consistently getting poor sleep.
Yeah, that's why. So like Bill Dement, he's the godfather of sleep medicine. He recently passed away. He started the field of sleep medicine at Stanford. He used to say sleepiness makes you stupid, because it speaks that whole point of like, when you're sleep deprived and you feel like you feel good, you have this false narrative and this sort of cognitive dissonance that you're okay, when really objectively, like if you were presented in an environment that had very little stimuli for you to attend to, you would have a hard time staying awake.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your take on Oura rings, Whoop, and stuff like that, tracking your sleep?
So I'm a big fan of all of the above. Again, it depends on who you are as a person. I think people who are obsessive have obsessive personality. It's not a good approach to use wearables, right? Because then they get obsessive about the data, and then there's psychosocial stress created around whether they're going to have a good recovery score. But I think they are good tools in the beginning if you're trying to figure out like which lifestyle habits are actually contributing to bad sleep or which ones to keep.
That makes sense. No, just use it as a tool to, again, kind of dial in the habits that you need to, the ones that make the big difference for you. Cool. I'm going to be super respectful of your time. I guess last question, do you have anything coming out like on your end in terms of research or anything like that you're like super excited for, or anything in the pipeline there from that perspective?
Yeah, I think the more research we can do to look at those things I was talking about, nature versus nurture, right? Like finding people for the right job at the right time based on their biology, and then giving them all the tools to succeed, like the holistic approach, not just sleep, but exercise, nutrition, recovery. That's, I would say, ultimately a lot of the work and research I do focuses on that, is like, how do we take this basic fundamental discoveries of sleep knowledge and now apply it to high performing humans or high performing populations?
Yeah, super exciting stuff. Again, Allison, really appreciate your time. A ton of great information in here, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing. It's super important stuff. Again, thank you for coming on. Is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or anything like that?
Of course, my book, Meathead, Unraveling the Athletic Brain. You can find it on Amazon. Either in that note, thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. We will chat with you next time.
All right, sounds good.